Hi, I'm Jay Elias, the General Legal Counsel at Dyer Lake Funeral Home in North Attleboro. Welcome to this episode of Live and Learn, a series of programs designed to be informative, educational, and upbeat, and intended to enhance and encourage our wellness and personal awareness. This episode is about creativity and something we call thinking outside the box. We'll talk more about that box later on in the program. But let's begin with the question of what is creativity? Creativity allows us to stretch our minds, to do new and exciting things, and to engage ourselves in ways that take us closer to reaching our full potential as individuals, regardless of age, education, or profession. But what makes a person creative? And are some people born creative, more so than others? Is creativity a skill that can be taught or developed? It seems that the definition of creativity is as varied as the concept itself. It's been described as the ability to come up with new and unique ideas, or the ability to create items that inspire and inform us. Creativity can be a way of expressing your individuality, for example, through writing, music, art, or even construction. It's being open-minded, thinking freely, not placing any limitations or constraints or restrictions on solutions to problems, and involving the use of our pre-existing knowledge and skills in a new and different manner. Creativity. It's often associated with the expression thinking outside the box. And one of my favorite descriptions of creativity is that it helps us strive to make the impossible possible. One thing is for certain, in order to be creative, we need to be able to view things in new ways and from different perspectives. And as we'll also learn, some people come by these creative tendencies a little bit more naturally than others, but all of us were born with creativity. And by incorporating a few creative practices into your daily life, you might just be able to achieve your full creative potential, regardless of your age. What do creative people seem to have in common? They often tend to have a great deal of energy, and yet are highly focused and quiet in their demeanor. Creative people can spend hours working on a single thing that holds their attention, yet seem to remain enthusiastic all the while. They can be imaginative and curious. Creative people tend to be bright, but also a bit naive. Although creative people tend to be smart, research has shown that having a high IQ doesn't necessarily correlate with having higher levels of creative achievement. Creative people also tend to have a combination of playfulness and discipline, responsibility and a little bit of irresponsibility. A playful attitude is one of the hallmarks of creativity, but lightheartedness and excitement is balanced by strength in perseverance. Creative people like to daydream and imagine the possibilities and wonders of the world, immersing themselves in imagination and fantasy, and yet seem remarkably grounded in reality. Creative people are often described as dreamers, but that doesn't mean that they live with their heads in the clouds. Instead, they come up with imaginative solutions to real-world problems. It's been suggested that creative people possess a combination of extroversion and introversion, being both gregarious and reticent, sociable and quiet. Interacting with others can generate ideas and inspiration, yet retreating to a quiet place allows the creative person to thoughtfully explore the sources of their creativity. Creative people are often remarkably humble, proud of their accomplishments, and independent, yet aware of their place in society. They have respect for others who work in their field and the influence of previous innovations. Creative people are often so focused on their next idea that they don't focus on their past achievements. So can creativity be learned? It seems that the opposite is actually true. Studies have consistently shown that it's non-creative behavior that we learn throughout our lives, not creative behavior. Consider this. In 1968, a researcher by the name of George Land conducted a study to test the creativity of 1,600 children ranging in age from 3 to 5 years of age who were enrolled in a Project Head Start program. It was the same creativity test that he devised for NASA several years earlier to help select truly innovative engineers and scientists. And because the assessment worked so well at NASA, he decided to try it on children. So he tested and then retested the same group of children at age 10 years of age, once again at 15 years of age, and as adults. And the results were astounding. Test results among 5-year-olds revealed an average creativity score of 98%. Think kindergartners. Test results among 10-year-olds showed an average creativity score of 30%, from 98% to 30%. Test results among 15-year-olds, high school age, showed an average creativity score of just 12%. Now, those same kids have reached high school with 10 years of school rules under their belt. Keep that in the back of your mind as we explore the concept of unlearning behavior. The same test given to 280,000 adults showed an average creativity score of 2%. The conclusion? In schools and businesses throughout the country, there's often a climate that encourages following policies and processes over creativity and emotional intelligence. It seems that although we may be born with natural creativity, as we grow to be adults, we learn to be uncreative. For most of us, our creativity has been stymied by countless rules and regulations, beginning when we're young. Our educational system was designed during the Industrial Revolution over 200 years ago, and it was intended to train us to be good task-oriented workers, to follow instructions, to do what we're told, to learn by rote, memorization and repetition, and to not be creative or independent thinkers. Now consider the simple joy of coloring with coloring books, pencils, or crayons. Most of us did this as children. Some people continue to enjoy the pleasure of coloring as adults. There's been a real resurgence in coloring among adults, as it's been shown to have the ability to relax us by reducing the thoughts of a restless mind, inducing the same state as meditation, and generally generating mindfulness and quietness. But remember, when you were a young child, both at home and at school, we were admonished to stay within the lines when we colored. Heaven help us if our pencils or our crayons strayed outside the lines. The result, though, is a perfect example of restricting our creativity. How do our personal habits limit our creativity as well as adults? Most of us rely on habits as we go through our days. It may be brushing our teeth or our hair, tying our shoelaces, buckling a belt, making a cup of coffee, buying a cup of coffee, and so forth. We as adults depend on our habits to keep us from being overloaded by every instance having to give thought and consideration to each of our actions throughout the day. We try and avoid paralysis by analysis, by not having to overthink every one of our actions. But in doing so, the healthy human brain figures out how to do things in a shortcut way, how to go on automatic pilot. We think about certain things and our brain locks into that automatic response or behavior. so that our conscious brain can focus on other matters. Habits serve as comfortable shortcuts so that we don't have to analyze each and every moment of our day. And when we rely on habits, we use that autonomous part of our brain. As I said, we're on autopilot. We aren't actually thinking. Instead, we're simply doing. No creative thought. Think about how many times you've gotten dressed without even thinking about it. How many times you've arrived at the market or the drugstore or the restaurant without noticing the route you took, the people you passed, the names of the street signs. That's because you were following a habit and your brain was on autopilot. There was no conscious thought involved. And therefore, there was no creativity involved either. The truth is that our brains really do function very differently when we're thinking creatively. When we're doing something creatively, the parts of the brain we use when we're in that business as usual and habit form are switched off. When we think creatively, though, we use the other parts of our brain that aren't involved in following our everyday routine. From an early age, most of us in our thinking involving problem solving focused on providing answers in a linear manner, one step in front of the other, deductive reasoning and logic. We drew logical, rational conclusions and were satisfied only when we arrived at that one right answer. That's linear thinking. Scientists have realized, though, that solving problems in a non-linear way seems to be the key to creativity. One of the objectives of thinking creatively and in a non-linear way is to experience that aha moment when you think, wow, I never thought of it that way before. I never looked at it that way. It's been said that every great idea grows from the potting soil of hundreds of bad ones, and with creativity, it's absolutely appropriate to be wrong. And I hate to use the word wrong when we're talking about creative thought. The truth is, there are no bad ideas. There are no wrong ideas. There are only building blocks for better ideas. Are there obstacles to thinking creatively? Yes. For adults, one of the greatest obstacles to thinking creatively is that we're often afraid of looking foolish. That, in turn, prevents us from trying new things. Compare that with how children encounter new situations. Give a kid a new toy. Introduce them to a new sport. Hand them a paintbrush or a box of crayons. Give them a musical instrument. Set them free and they'll inevitably go to town trying to figure out which way to make a go of it. They're not thinking, I'm going to look foolish, I'm going to look stupid. They don't hold back. Now think about how many times you've seen an adult do the same thing. Well, therein lies the primary obstacle to thinking creatively. Our fear of looking foolish, our fear of thinking beyond our comfort zone. So thinking creatively involves exercising the mind. Let's apply the concept of nonlinear thinking to a simple puzzle, a riddle of sorts. A man was sitting with his friend on a New York subway train. He turned to his friend and said, 14, 18, 23, 28, 34. The man asked his friend what the next number was in the series. 14, 18, 23, 28, 34. And for the next 10 minutes, the friend wrestled with the numbers, trying to figure out the mathematical relationship between them. 14, 18, there's 4 numbers apart. 18 and 23, there's 5 numbers. 23 and 28, 5. 28 and 34, 6. He added 4, he divided by 2, he subtracted, he reversed the order of the numbers. He tried every possible mathematical combination he could think of. Finally, as they stepped off the subway, he admitted to his friend he was stumped. His friend, with a devilish grin, pointed at the sign on the subway station wall that said, 42nd Street. They had just traveled from 14th Street to 42nd Street, with the signs for each stop along the way clear as the noses on their face, right outside the window, right inside the subway. It had never occurred to the friend that the answer was not a mathematical calculation. The mathematical calculation had nothing to do with this. The answer was right in front of him the whole time. But he was so focused on that linear way of thinking and the possible mathematical solutions, he failed to notice the obvious answers. He not only failed to pay attention, he was so locked into thinking in that linear way, like so many of us, he failed to notice that there were other ways of thinking to solve a problem. And it may not have been a mathematical solution at all. But because the problem involved numbers, he immediately assumed there had to be a numerical mathematical answer. By the way, there are also, as you might suspect, health benefits associated with creativity. Active participants in creative activities have been shown to improve both physical and mental health for people of all ages, but especially those in their later years. For example, studies have shown that the benefits of singing in a choir include reduced stress levels and depression, lowering blood pressure, stabilizing heart rate and hormone levels, stimulating the release of endorphins, the feel-good hormones, and improved feelings of social well-being and connectiveness. A joint study by Harvard and Yale universities found that increased life expectancy may well have been the result of a group of people participating in a choir. Add to those fewer doctor visits, fewer falls, lower rates of medication usage, and improved life satisfaction, and all are associated with creative thought and activity. And as I've said, creativity has no age limits. There's no expiration date. It seems from a neuroscience point of view that we're all hardwired for creativity for as long as we choose to stay at it. There's no reason to assume that we'll stop being creative just because we have gray hair. But here's the thing. To derive the real benefits of creative thinking, you have to continue to be creative. What that means is that just because you've always thought of yourself as creative, you painted landscapes in watercolor ever since you were a child, and you continue to do so. You've been playing the piano since you were 10 years old, but you're not deriving the true benefits of creativity. Repeating the same creative pursuits throughout your life without challenging yourself or mixing things up is a bit like following the same physical exercise routine every day. Walking around the neighborhood following the same route every day may be good for you, but it's not until you start to climb the steeper hills that you've been avoiding, or walking at a brisker pace, that you've derived real benefit. So what I'm suggesting is that the watercolorist should try to learn the piano, and the pianist should pick up a paintbrush. The idea is to continue to stretch the way we think, to look at life from a new angle, to challenge, to try and avoid relying on those old habits that have become automatic in our lives. Here's an example of a creative thought and a creative actor. The famed pianist Arthur Rubinstein played publicly well into his 80s. Although he couldn't play certain passages at the same pace as when he was younger, he knew he couldn't disappoint as many listeners and concert goers. So rather than not playing the pieces that had become challenging for his arthritic hands, what he did was this. Several measures in advance of those quickly paced passages, he would instead slow down the pace so that when he got to those faster paced passages, it seemed that the notes he was playing were as fast as they had been when he was younger. It was relative speed. He applied real creativity to a real life problem. So let's get back to that concept of thinking outside the box. When someone asks us to approach a problem creatively, creatively, they often suggest that we need to think outside the box. The expression has generally come to mean thinking freely, not worrying about following norms or adhering to our usual and customary thinking patterns. That box has come to symbolize unimaginative thinking. As it turns out, though, rather than being purely metaphorical in the sense of a box, the reference to thinking outside the box actually derives from a puzzle, a two-dimensional image of a square. First published in Sam Lloyd's Cyclopedia of 5,000 Puzzles, Tricks, and Conundrums, dating back to 1914. The puzzle, known as the 9 dots puzzle, was posed like this. Draw a continuous line through the center of all the dots so as to mark them off in the fewest number of strokes without lifting the pen and without tracing the same line more than once. So looking at that 9-dot puzzle, the test is this. Draw a continuous line through the center of all the dots so as to mark them off in the fewest number of strokes without lifting the pen and without tracing the same line more than once. We'll revisit the puzzle and its solution at the end of the program. In the meantime, think creatively and in a non-linear way as you consider a solution to the puzzle. Use what's known as lateral thinking, not linear thinking. At its core, lateral thinking refers to a person's capacity to address problems by imagining solutions that can't be arrived at by way of traditional deductive or logical means. Lateral thinking is the ability to develop original answers to difficult questions. It's a term frequently associated with that creative outside-the-box thought process. Lateral thinking isn't a gift we're born with. Rather, it's a skill that is learned. It relies heavily on the attitude of our mind, and we can develop lateral thinking skills through a variety of techniques. The first one is challenge the assumptions that you normally would make. Second, brainstorm. Third, create alternative solutions. Even if it seems to most of us that there's a perfectly acceptable solution, create an alternative. And finally, and perhaps most critically, suspend your predetermined judgment. That last technique may be the most difficult one, suspending your predetermined judgment. That means put on hold your conventional approach to problem solving. Think laterally. Think outside the box. So it seems that a creative approach to thinking can be practiced. And that brings us to the next series of puzzles. You may find some of these puzzles that you're going to see on your screen a bit frustrating because there's not necessarily one answer to the puzzle. Each puzzle presents a bit of information from which you, the problem solver, must find an explanation. Remember that because the puzzles don't contain enough information to determine the solution in the form of a yes or no, right or wrong manner, much of the process involves asking yourself questions to narrow down possible solutions. In short, I'm asking you to think outside the box. Suspend your predetermined judgment as to the solutions. Again, it's possible to create multiple answers for each one, but each problem does have a best answer that's the most satisfying and fitting for the given statement, although it may not necessarily be the only correct answer. And logic or lateral thinking puzzles, they involve riddles sometimes. They're ideal for all of us, especially as we grow older, because they encourage that creative thinking. They help us to fire up neural pathways that may have become a bit dormant by thinking linearly and following our habits. So the next lateral puzzle appears on the screen as a very simple and basic drawing of a bus. Take my word for it, it's a bus. The question is this: can you determine based solely on the drawing in front of you, in which direction the bus is traveling. It is either traveling to the left or to the right. Simple question. Which way is the bus going? To the left or to the right? Based solely on what you see in front of you. If you find yourself stumbling with the solution, it probably won't make you feel any better to know that 80% of children under the age of 10 who were presented with this puzzle got the answer in 30 seconds or less. 30 seconds. Still stumped? Here's a trick. Look at that drawing. There are no visible doors. So where do the passengers board? They must board this bus on the opposite side. So if the door is on the opposite side, this means the bus must be moving to the left. And if you're wondering why kids figure it out so quickly, the answer seems to be that children often make judgments based on the first visual cue they see, while we, as more experienced adults, rely on multiple sources of information. We analyze and overanalyze. It's a classic case of overthinking it. No door, door's on the other side. The door's on the other side, that means the bus must be going to the left. Next, imagine you see a wooden box. You see it actually right in front of you. This one's a bit of a riddle. The question is this: what can you put in that heavy wooden box that you're seeing on your screen that would make it lighter? What could you put in that heavy wooden box that would make it lighter? But before you answer, the more of them you put in, the lighter it becomes. And before you answer that, one more clue. The box must remain empty. So forget feathers and forget helium balloons. The more you put in, the lighter it becomes. The box has to stay empty. Well, it seems that the most probable answer for us lateral thinkers is a hole. The more holes that you put in the box, the lighter it becomes. Let's picture the next puzzle. A man and his faithful companion. The man stands on one side of a river, his dog on the other side. The man calls his dog, who immediately crosses the river without getting wet. No bridge, no boat. How'd the dog do it? The man calls his dog, who immediately crosses the river. Dog doesn't get wet. There's no bridge, there's no boat. The solution? The river was frozen. I don't know how many of you thought of that, but the river was frozen. The next lateral thinking puzzle goes something like this. A window cleaner is cleaning the windows on the 25th floor of a skyscraper. 25th floor of a skyscraper when he suddenly slips and falls. He's not wearing a safety harness. There's nothing to slow his fall. And yet, he suffered no injuries. How's that possible? As it turns out, he's cleaning the windows inside the skyscraper, and his fall was just to the floor. Here's one for you. Lateral thinking. Think creatively, outside the box. Throw away your preconceived and predetermined judgments. Here's the puzzle. Acting on an anonymous phone call, the police raid a house to arrest a suspected murderer. They don't know what he looks like. They only know his name is John, and he's inside the house. They bust in, and there is a carpenter, a truck driver, a mechanic, and a fireman, all playing poker. Without any hesitation or communication of any kind, they immediately arrest the fireman. How do they know they've got their man? Well, it turns out that the only man was the fireman. The carpenter, the truck driver, and the mechanic were all women. This next one is pretty straightforward, so I'm hoping that you all get it immediately. A woman walked up to a man behind a counter and handed him a book. He looked at it and said, "That'll be $4. The woman paid the man, walked out without the book. He saw her. She was leaving, but he didn't call her back. How come? The woman left an overdue library book and paid the fee of $4. lateral thinking on this next one. Can you name 3 consecutive days, without using the words Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday? 3 consecutive days without naming the days of the week. The solution? Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Here's a challenging one for you. A man is wearing black. Think cat burglar. Black shoes, black socks, trousers, black coat, black gloves, black ski mask over his face. He's walking down a side street and all the streetlights are off. A black car is coming towards him with its lights off. And yet, the car somehow manages to stop in time before hitting him. How'd the driver see the man? The answer? It was daytime. The final lateral puzzle before we revisit the 9 dots puzzle is this. How can you throw a ball as hard as you can and make it stop and return to you without hitting anything and with nothing attached to it? How can you throw a ball as hard as you can, make it stop, return to you, the ball doesn't hit anything, and nothing is attached to it? The solution? Throw the ball straight up in the air above you. And let's conclude these lateral puzzle thoughts by going back to the 9 dots puzzle, the puzzle that gave rise to the expression thinking outside the box. Remember, the directions for the puzzle calls for us to draw a continuous line through the center of all the dots so as to mark them off in the fewest number of strokes, without lifting the pen and without tracing the same line more than once. And now, the thinking outside the box solution. What box? There is no box. It seems that the only way to achieve the result is to extend at least one of those lines beyond the perimeter of the box. The solution, therefore, lies in the observation that it's okay to cross boundaries and extend the lines beyond the perimeter of the box that doesn't exist. They're just 3 dots in a row on each side. It never occurs to most of us. Why is that? It's because when we see those 9 dots, we see a box. And that box informs and limits our thinking. We made an assumption about how we were supposed to solve the puzzle. In the directions for that puzzle, though, there was no indication that you had to stay within the confines of those 9 dots. Our minds built a box out of those 9 dots. And when we visualize the box, and because we're so entrenched in thinking that we have to stay within the margins of everything we do in life, we've created this constraint that limits our ability to solve the box puzzle creatively. We do this all the time in our lives. That simple puzzle acts as a metaphor for the way we think every day and how we approach problems and in turn solutions, and in turn how we view life. We need to think outside the box a bit more. But that's difficult to do when we aren't even aware that we've created those boxes or our own limitations. So again, I'm Jay Elias, and thank you for watching this episode of Live and Learn. I look forward to your joining me again for another program designed to enhance and encourage your wellness and awareness. And until then, instead of thinking outside the box, why not just get rid of the box?